Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Jacqueline Hudson, and I'm the Expositions content developer here at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center here in Cincinnati. And we are here today to do a gallery talk on Macon Bolling Allen, the first African-American lawyer in the United States, in which we have an exhibit currently on the third floor in the building until March 31st, to the end of this month. So today we have three distinguished guests who have expertise in the legal field, and we're going to talk more on a little bit more about Mr. Allen. So we have first the Honorable John Browning, and we have Mr. Conway Ekpo, Esquire, and we have Mr. Remington Jackson. Hello, gentlemen. How are you today?
Fine, thank you, Dr. Hudson. Pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm glad that you are here as well. So I'm going to let each of you introduce yourselves and provide a little bit of a background, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So whoever wants to start first.
Judges always start first. That's the rules.
So, I actually have, a PhD in American Cultural Studies. I also have a graduate certificate in public history. And so basically I am, like I said earlier, I'm the Expositions content developer here at the Freedom Center. And my job is to create content for temporary exhibits, and I'm in charge of bringing traveling exhibits here as well. So, and then I'm also just here in a supporting role for the museum experience team.
I'll go ahead and go next. My name is Remington Jackson. I am the president of the Black Lawyers Association of Cincinnati, BLAC. In my paid job, because I like to think of my BLAC position as my volunteer job, but in my paid job, I work as an associate in commercial real estate for a law firm named Moore & Van Allen.
I guess I'll go next. My name is Justice John Browning, and I'm a partner in the law firm of Spencer Fain in Texas. I'm a former justice on Texas's biggest and busiest appellate court, the Fifth Court of Appeals, and I serve as a distinguished jurist in residence and professor of law at Faulkner University Thomas Good Jones School of Law. My work in African-American legal history has been published in such journals as the Howard Law Journal, the Berkeley Journal of African-American Law and Policy, and the Thurgood Marshall Law Review, among others.
Good afternoon. Good to be with you all. My name is Conway Ekpo. I am a director and associate general counsel at a fintech company called Brex, which you may have never heard of, but we are a financial one-stop shop for other fintechs and mid-sized companies. Prior to that was in-house counsel on Wall Street, and prior to that, I was in private practice for about a decade here in New York City. And that's my day job. In addition to my day job, also the president and on the board of directors of a nonprofit called the Black Big Law Pipeline, which is a nonprofit that focuses on teaching substantive and soft skills to Black law firm associates. And in addition to that, founded an organization, which I'm sure we'll get into, called 1844, which takes its name from the year that Macon Bolling Allen became licensed to practice law in America.
Well, thank you for those wonderful introductions. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the first question is, what would you like to discuss initially about Macon Bolling Allen's life as the first African-American lawyer in the United States?
I'll be happy to take this first, Dr. Hudson, if that's okay.
That's fine.
I think the biggest thing is that Macon Bolling Allen is what I would call a forgotten first. His significance in American history and particularly African-American legal history is, great as not only the first Black lawyer in the United States, but the first Black judge. as well. And yet he's largely been overlooked by historians. And in addition, very little scholarship has been done into his life and work. And to make things even worse, as we'll talk about later, you can't even get an image of him because if you go online, there are frequent mistakes in which a photo of a different early Black lawyer, Robert Morris, is identified as Macon Allen. So, I think a lot of this is about, educating and informing people about someone who is truly a giant in the legal field.
I'd like to add on to that, just especially that last term, giant. I think in a lot of our fields, especially the legal practice, we talk about standing on the shoulders of giants. And I really like that term, forgotten first, because up until going to law school, I had never heard of Macon Allen. And I think it's so important that that changes with the future generations and making sure that we are passing down this information and he doesn't continue to be a forgotten first.
Absolutely, I agree with what's been said, and which was why the organization that founded 8 years ago in New York, which focuses on Black men in law firms here in New York City, we were inspired by his story and decided to name our organization after the year that he was founded. So it would always spark conversation whenever somebody here. It's always a conversation starter. Whenever someone, whether we were making reservations at a restaurant or we're being featured on a panel or whatever it is, they're like, "Why do you call yourselves 1844?" And then it's an invitation for us to get into his story.
Yeah, actually, Judge Hornby actually referred me to you, and I was like, definitely wanted to have you on the panel to talk about your organization. You're doing great things for Black lawyers in the United States. So let's start with Mr. Allen's early life. Based on my research for this exhibit, I could not find much about Mr. Allen's life outside of him being born in Indiana, and he was a teacher as a young man. Does any of the panelists have any additional information about his early life prior to him being a teacher? Do you think that him being a teacher informed his desire to get into the legal field?
I'll be happy to jump in and start off, Dr. Hudson. We do know, of course, that he was employed as a school teacher early on, up until becoming a lawyer at the age of 28. It was actually very common for many of the early African-American lawyers in our history to start out as teachers or to move from being teachers to lawyers, but still keep their teaching largely as a source of steady income, because as we'll talk about, it was often uncertain financially for Black lawyers, kind of finding their way in the communities in which they practiced, especially if they were practicing in an area in which there was not a significant African-American community for clientele. And of course, it was difficult, obtaining confidence and trust of white clients during this period of time. So teaching provided a source of steady income for an educated, Black man at that time. Macon Bolling Allen, he came of age at a time when even among free African Americans in 1850, only 41% were literate. During that period of time, primarily because of oppressive and degrading laws, during antebellum America, when it was actually a crime to teach African Americans to read or write. So, only about 2% of African Americans had schooling. So that was, just overall. So teaching was actually a pretty important way for him to have a steady income. Many other early Black lawyers were, ministers. Some started newspapers. This was certainly a way of signaling he was literate, he was educated, and he was more than capable of taking on the sort of challenges that, a lawyer be welcomed with. We also know that he was biracial. A number of later censuses refer to him as being mulatto. That was the term used, during that period of time. Number of newspaper accounts also refer, to his background, speculating on whether he was part Native American or if there was white ancestry. But we do know that, he was biracial.
Another thing that I read recently was that, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but his name originally wasn't Macon Allen, it was Macon Bolling. And then he took possession.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, took possession of his name.
And he actually changed it when he moved to Massachusetts in January of 1844.
Yeah, I think that's.
We don't know why, but he, he decided to change it to, the name we know him by now.
You're on mute, Dr. Hudson.
Okay, so Mr. Allen went through many hardships in his path to become a lawyer in both Maine and Massachusetts. Who would like to expound on his difficulty in taking the bar in Maine because the state bar didn't consider him of, quote, good moral character because he was an African-American? And who would like to expound on the report that Mr. Allen had to walk many miles to take the bar?
I'll be happy to jump in and lead off on that as well, Dr. Hudson, if everyone's okay with that. There's actually been some common misconception about the circumstances under which he first became a lawyer. We know that after reading the law under the tutelage of an abolitionist lawyer, Samuel Fessenden, he sat for the Maine bar exam. But Macon Allen was a resident of Massachusetts at the time. It was thought that perhaps Maine would be, more hospitable. There might be less opposition. And he sat, he was sponsored for admission in April of 1844 by Samuel Fessenden. And his application was rejected. Now, commonly, because there are only brief mentions that it was on account of his citizenship, people have drawn the conclusion that kind of like with the Dred Scott decision in 1857, being African-American, he was not considered a citizen. But that's actually incorrect. The Maine Constitution at the time did not distinguish between black and white in terms of citizenship. In addition, they had two ways in which you could become a lawyer. You could, upon the motion of someone who was an existing lawyer sponsoring you, like Mr. Fessenden, as long as you were a citizen and of the state. Now, it's a number of the newspapers reporting his denial noted the fact that he was from Massachusetts and a citizen of that state. So that's really why that was denied. But not wanting to, wait around, the next time he had an opportunity to seek admission was by the alternate method, and that was by examination. And that was just a few months later in July 1844. Now, we do know that certainly on account of his race, he had a tough time there. The contemporary accounts refer to his examination by a committee of local lawyers appointed by a judge as protracted. So, they didn't give him an easy time whatsoever. We also know that at least two members of the committee refused to even attend his examination, presumably because of his race. And another committee member who voted against admitting him said that he would be, if admitted, a disgrace to the bar. However, the judge who presided over the examining committee said he's clearly in all qualifications, he meets all the qualifications and he should not be denied for any other reason. And we presume he was talking about race. And so in July 1844, Macon Allen was admitted to the bar of Maine. Now we do know that Maine, with then, and it probably hasn't changed a whole lot since, did not have a very sizable African-American community. And he didn't have great financial prospects. So he moves back to Massachusetts. And he is admitted to the Massachusetts bar in 1845. Now, we also know that he encountered difficulty building a practice there because not long after that, he's writing to John Jay in New York, the famed jurist, inquiring about the possibility of moving to New York because of the prospects being better there. So, we almost had Macon Allen moving to New York instead of being in Massachusetts and later South Carolina. The story about him walking an estimated 50 miles to take the bar in Massachusetts, it was held at that time in Worcester, Massachusetts, so it wasn't being held in Boston. That story may be apocryphal. There's no real historical threads that point to that being accurate. However, we do know that Macon Allen was financially, struggling. In fact, the $20 bar license fee in Maine was actually advanced on his behalf by Samuel Fessenden. And there's some correspondence where he speculates on whether or not, Macon Allen is going to be successful enough to, pay him back anytime soon. And that $20 then was about $650 in today's dollars. So, it's pretty stiff, kind of discouraged casual, people from exploring entry into the legal profession. But, certainly with limited financial means, he probably, had to explore, other ways of getting to Worcester for the exam. And that may have included walking because of not being able to afford, other means of transportation.
Awesome. Mr. Jackson or Mr. Ekpo, you want to add anything to the conversation?
I would just note that I agree with what Mr. Browning just recounted there. It was definitely difficult times for Mr. Allen during that examination period. We know that from Samuel Fessenden that he stated on several occasions that he didn't think that the examiners for the bar exam in Maine wanted Macon Bolling Allen to pass the bar exam, as Mr. Browning noted. So there's a lot of consistency in that story. Clearly he was facing very significant odds becoming the first African-American attorney at the time, and not to least of which is that this is at a time, I think it's good to contextualize this, in 1844, where just a few states away, Black people were property. Forget about taking the bar exam. I mean, we're talking about like property and humanity. And so I think that was one of the more powerful takeaways from this time period, is that, here you have some 2 decades before the 13th Amendment would enter into, the Constitution, and before the Civil War would come to an end. And you have this individual, this African-American individual who is defying all odds and becoming a practicing lawyer. Wherein other people are literally in bondage in the same country.
I also want to add, in terms of the teacher point, how important that is probably to his legacy in terms of going from being a teacher to wanting to pursue another goal, becoming an attorney, how high that bar is that you're setting for yourself, knowing how important history is and the laws are to our history in terms of changing things in the country. All of those aspects going into his mental, there's not being the first of anything is so impactful, not having someone before you that's kind of leading the path for you. I just, not obviously not knowing him, but just how important going through those steps to where he ended up going and actually achieving that goal. I think that's extremely noteworthy.
Yeah, he definitely had a very interesting trajectory in becoming a lawyer, and actually an interesting trajectory once he did become, pass the bar. So, so we're going to move on to his years as a judge. So who, Mr. Ekpo, can you maybe talk, a little bit about his experiences as a judge?
I wouldn't say that I'm an expert on his time as a judge. Just know that he became the first African-American judge in Massachusetts, in the state of Massachusetts. Let me contextualize. The first African-American judge in the country residing in the state of Massachusetts, on their, in like Middlesex County, I believe it was. And so had a number of experiences there as, seeing practitioners come before a Black judge. You can only imagine what that might have looked like in the 1940s, or excuse me, the 1840s, when he was sitting on the bench.
And Dr. Hudson is perhaps the only judge on the panel. Step in and give a little bit of judicial perspective on that.
Sure, of course.
So Macon Allen is, he's popular, or his politics are right at the right time during that period. The Whig Party, which was closely aligned with the abolitionist cause, is kind of, one of the dominant parties in Massachusetts at that time. And in 1848, he becomes a justice of the peace, as Mr. Ekpo said, in Middlesex County. Now that actually was a plum assignment, and for Macon Allen, a struggling lawyer, it was actually expected to be a steady source of income. So he did that, but I think it's important to stress that this appointment and the prestige of it was, by no means a shield and insulation against other struggles that he faced. Macon Allen was actually attacked in 1849 by 4 men, 2 of whom were released and 2 of whom were charged criminally. We don't know if this was a racialized attack, but the presumption is quite likely. Newspaper accounts don't give us much to go on. We also know that in 1852 he was arrested. His landlord was preferred charges against him because he was ripping out large sections of the home that he was renting and burning the wood as fuel, which tells you, it may have been, again, a source of struggling times financially if he was literally ripping out, wood from his staircase to use, to keep his family warm. We also know that he suffered through tragedy, personal tragedy. He lost 2 children early on in childhood, one at 11 months, one at 7 months. And then after the Civil War ended, he, like many African Americans, moved back to the South for both economic opportunity and to help uplift and rebuild the African American communities there. So in 1868, he moves to South Carolina. There again, tragedy strikes, and in 1870, he loses both his wife and his 12-year-old daughter to meningitis. So he finds himself a single father of 5 at the age of 53. Now, he does great things in South Carolina. His reputation as the first African-American lawyer in the country precedes him. He starts the first African-American owned law firm with 2 other lawyers, William Whipper and Robert Elliott, both whom also were Northern transplants. And he becomes active in politics there. As you know, during Reconstruction, with Blacks now being enfranchised.
He got, so we'll just keep going.
They have of South Carolina and loses. He then runs for judge, a position chosen by the legislature. He loses that, but then the winning candidate, George Lee, dies in early 1873, and then Macon Allen is chosen. He's actually chosen over his law partner, William Whipper, by the legislature to fill that judicial vacancy. So he becomes a judge of a court that basically hears appeals from the criminal courts in that county, Charleston County. And he serves as a judge there for 3 years before becoming a judge of a probate court. He gets elected probate court judge in 1876 and serves out his term but does not run for re-election. A lot of people may wonder why. At that point, with the end of Reconstruction and the withdrawal, greatly increased racial violence against Blacks and a retaking of power by white Southern Democrats, his position was precarious.
You're on mute, Dr. Hudson.
He definitely had a storied career in, as a judge as well. And so, yeah, it was, in my research, it was interesting that, again, he had a lot of firsts, which, including opening up the first African-American law firm in, with other two other African-American lawyers. So, so this next question is direct to Mr. Ekpo and Mr. Jackson. Here are a few statistics about African-American lawyers in the field. The 2021 American Bar Association's profile of the legal profession revealed in their data that only 5% of the practicing attorneys in the United States are African-American. In 2019, only 3% of registered attorneys in the state of Ohio are African-American. What are some of the parallels that current African-Americans face in the legal field? And what are some of the changes your specific organizations are working on to change that?
If it's okay with you, Mr. Ekpo, I'll go first. I also want to add one thing to your point, Dr. Hudson. The amount of African-American attorneys in the country has actually gone down in the past 10 years. In 2011, the number was at 4.8%, and in 2021, the American Bar Association found those at 4.7%. So in 10 years of attempting progress and diversification and different organizations and firms trying to increase diversity, the numbers have actually gone down. So the question becomes, why is that the case? Things I've found in my own personal experience, as well as anecdotal evidence from friends and associates, especially in Cincinnati, the act of getting into a big law firm or even a law firm in general is an issue, but then also retention of talent. So once you go to an organization where you are the only one, and you may have some that believe you to be just the diversity hire, or once you become the only one, not having anyone there to support you, not having any mentors, or even better yet, having any sponsors along that pathway in big law or law firms, it kind of begins to deter you from staying in that field, especially given the long hours and the sacrifice of time. So instead, other attorneys are starting to shift towards in-house counsel positions. One of the ways that my the organization I am president for, the Black Lawyers Association of Cincinnati, we've tried to create different avenues for one, sponsorship, and two, scholarship. So we have 4 scholarships that we award to law students every single year that range $2,500 to $5,000 that we give at a banquet, where one, we're hopefully bringing attention to those law students that win the scholarships in terms of if they're looking for jobs at the time, or if they just need to continue to build their name as they figure out their legal position. Other than that, we also have a mentorship program where we're trying to turn students' ability to have mentors to sponsors. And the reason why I make the distinction is a mentor is someone that takes you out to lunch or that offers you coffee, or hey, I'll send your resume along. A sponsor is someone that speaks about your name in rooms that you might not even know where conversations are being had. Myself personally, I remember a sponsor of mine not only passed along my resume, but knew the GC at that organization where I was trying to get a job, made a call to him directly and said, hey, you should check this person out. There were over 100 candidates for that position. Because of him making that call, my resume went from the bottom of the pile to the top of the pile, and ended up getting that position. And that individual who actually had shifted, Brian Thomas, attorney who was at Graydon, had moved over to Fifth Third. Without him doing that and sponsoring me in that position, I would have never probably gotten past the first or second round of interviews. So it's having that type of person in the room, but we're assuming that there's more of those people in the rooms. And when you have this gap in between, as I said, those that are choosing to stay in law, it becomes pretty difficult, where if you're hoping that someone will continue talking about you or continue sponsoring you in rooms when no one in that room looks like you. Not to say that someone has to look like you for obviously for them to be an ally or for them to be a help, but it is more, it is a lot easier to expect that when you have someone that has also been through similar circumstances as yourself. So I say all that to say, there are similar struggles that obviously not as dramatic as what Mr. Allen went through, but there are similar struggles in the current legal path that for law students and even more seasoned attorneys like myself.
Yeah, agree with everything Mr. Jackson just said, and I would specifically point to highlight the experiences of African-American attorneys within the law firm context, even though that is not the most attorneys are solo practitioners in the United States, and only about a quarter or less than that actually practice within the great halls of large law firms of the AmLaw 100, as it were. But the numbers are dire, and African Americans are one of the only demographics that continues to recede, even when other minorities make little, small strides in terms of representation. If you look at the AmLaw 100 law firms in the United States, and it's important to note, put into context, these are the firms that have great access to power, to representation. These are the firms that can influence, for example, representations that go all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States, the biggest leaders of every industry, et cetera. So to be in these rooms, there's a reason why I'm highlighting this particular level of practice is because this is where a lot of access to be able to effectuate change for communities can take place within large law firms. And if you look in these firms, Black lawyers are typically around about 5%. It was 5.2% on the last NALP study, whereas Latino attorneys were 6.1% and Asians were 12.5%. And if you look at partners, we are just barely about 2.2%, so just barely above the 2% mark, which we crossed for the first time in 2020 in the wake of the social unrest after Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. And so that was the first time that Black partners in the history of the country became more than 2% of the partners of the AmLaw 100 law firms. And just sit with that for a second. These are institutions that have been around for over a century in some cases. And we're still trying to make these strides still in 2022. And so this is a ongoing struggle, ongoing fight, something that we're always trying to highlight. And so our organization that we created, the 1844, as well as the Black Legal Law Pipeline, as well as many others, the National Bar Association's Commercial Law Section, many other organizations that are aimed at trying to remedy and ameliorate these disparities. It's an ongoing struggle, and one, it's an important struggle, and one that we can't relent and we can't give up on. And progress is slow and it's frustrating at times, but one that we still have to take up the mantle and keep going forward on.
One other thing I would add is the question of representation. So the numbers, if you don't have someone, which is why, of course, Mr. Allen is so important, have someone before you to lead that path, or someone to look at and admire and say, I'm going to follow behind that person. If you don't have those numbers, just getting to 2.2%, as Mr. Ekpo stated, that's so important in terms of if you are someone that says, I want to become a partner of the firm and be able to have that distinction and that honor, first person in your family, more than likely, if there are no Black partners at that particular firm you're interested in, or just no Black partners at any firm in your surrounding area, depending upon what part of the country you're in, that can be at times very discouraging. And changing that dynamic and that representation issue is still something that we're currently working on.
Thanks for the insight about what's going on in regards to African American lawyers today. So Honorable Browning, I know we kind of talked a little bit like last week about your quest or your research and finding the correct or the correct image of Mr. Allen. So can you, expound a little bit about, I know you just mentioned it earlier in our talk, but I just wanted to see if you can expound a little bit more about what you found or what you didn't find in regards to finding the correct image of Mr. Allen.
Sure, be happy to. And let me tell you, I really want to solve this mystery and find his portrait somewhere, because I'm getting tired of writing to the ABA Journal and Above the Law and every other legal blog that publishes something during Black History Month and shows a picture of Robert Morris instead of, Macon Allen, because there isn't anything to show, unfortunately. So we do know that a portrait exists. We do know that because there's correspondence and newspaper references that while he was a judge in South Carolina, at the request of the folks back in Maine, the Cumberland County Bar Association, who are collecting portraits of prominent attorneys with connections to Portland, Maine, what's called a fine oil portrait is done and is sent to Maine and hangs in what was the Portland City Hall, where the Cumberland County Bar Association prominent lawyers gallery is displayed. We know, however, that in 1893 there's a storm that has severe rain damage, that some portraits suffered some water damage. We don't know if Macon Allen's was among those. We know that a few years later there was a fire at the City Hall, but contemporary accounts tell us that the portraits were spared. We also see references in a catalog for the Cumberland County Law Library of a listing of portraits with, numbered assignments, and we know that there's references to Macon Allen's. But then around 1916, we still see a list, but we see the number with Macon Allen's name on it with two red lines crossed out. And we also know that when the portraits that were remaining were donated or became the property of Maine Historical Society, which today, and believe me, I've been in contact with the Maine Historical Society and everybody in connection with that. They have no record of any portrait. It's possible that in 1916, when the Klan was in resurgence across America, even in a state like Maine, and of course culminating in the Red Summer of 1919, where there was such horrendous violence nationwide and a record number of lynchings, that it could be that the portrait was removed, destroyed, damaged. All we know is that no one can track it down now. It may have also been that, with Jim Crow laws in effect in 1916, the idea of honoring a Black man who was the first Black lawyer and first Black judge just didn't sit well with some folks, even in Maine. So I've been through the South Carolina Historical Society, the Charleston Historical Society, every museum in between South Carolina and Maine and Massachusetts, and I've yet to encounter this, but I'm not going to stop hunting because we know that a portrait was done. And it really stands in stark contrast to someone like Robert Morris, his contemporary, who was financially more successful, left kind of a legacy behind in terms of his papers and his library that he donated, and of whom there, are a couple of photos that survive and, of course, proliferate on the internet. Frederick Douglass, I think it's important to note, knew the importance of being photographed, of having your portrait taken. He was the most photographed person of the 19th century. And it was important, particularly with, a role in projecting, positivism and a role model and, Black success and upward mobility to have that done. So, that's it's something I'm not going to stop looking for, but unfortunately, we don't have the answer to that mystery yet.
Well, definitely keep us posted. I definitely would like to, hopefully you'll find some success in finding that painting of Mr. Allen. So I would like to address this last question to all the panelists. In the last panel of the exhibit, It is noted that Allen made an impact on the legal field in his lifetime. How do each of you define his legacy and how it shaped the future of African-American lawyers in the field?
I'll be happy to lead off with that, Dr. Hudson. Again, I refer to him as a forgotten first, and we can't ever forget, all of these firsts. First Black lawyer, first Black judge, the person who formed the first Black-owned law firm. These are all significant firsts. But Macon Allen was very conscious of his role, of his significance, and of the barriers that he broke down. And he channeled that to uplifting others. Between 1868 and 1877, there were 47 Black lawyers admitted to practice in South Carolina. For that time, that was an astonishing number anywhere in the South or really in the country. I mean, in 1930, Texas only had 12 in the entire state. So that tells you something. And a number of those lawyers, if you look at their records of admittance, a number of them were either ones who had read the law under the tutelage of Macon Allen, or were ones who were examined and admitted to practice before a committee on which Macon Allen sat. So he was very conscious of his role in uplifting other African Americans into the legal profession. Yes, he was the first one through the door, and the first one through the door, as they say, always gets bloody. But he broke barriers. And again, I think either Mr. Jackson or Mr. Ekpo refer to this as the fact that we stand on the shoulders of giants. There would be no Ketanji Brown Jacksons, no Loretta Lynch's, no Eric Holders without the Thurgood Marshalls and the Constance Baker Motleys of a preceding generation. And there would be no Thurgood Marshalls or Constance Baker Motley without the earliest generation to make it through that barrier. And that's what Macon Allen represents.
This feels like I'm in church because I want to say amen to everything Mr. Browning just said just now, because
I'm ready to preach.
I agree wholeheartedly, 100%. I would just say succinctly what he represents, in my view, is everything that Mr. Browning just said, and I would just say succinctly, lifting as you climb. I think he embodies lifting as you climb, and of course, to whom much is given, much is required, which many of us are familiar with, where he recognized his place. He recognized his place in history. It would have been very easy for him to be selfish and to say, look, I did it, and just turn around and not turn around and lift the ladder up and not help others. But he didn't do that. He chose to help others. He chose to break down those barriers and continue to help put the rest of us on. So lifting as he climbed, and keeping true to the faith of to whom much is given, much is required.
But you both have taken all the great sayings, so I'll try and think of something else to add on. But I would just say that the importance of mentorship and sponsorship, as I stated before, is embodied in Mr. Allen, most particularly because there's so many that will say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I remember a great mentor of mine said that it's such a offensive thing to tell someone to pull yourself up by your bootstraps when you don't know if they have boots or not. And there's so many of the prior generation that weren't given the same opportunities, and ensuring that the future generation that doesn't occur. I can't remember which president said it, but legacy is ensuring that you plant the trees that you'll never get the chance to sit underneath of. And I think it's so important that we continue passing along that legacy of ensuring that things are different for future generations, for future Black attorneys, that percentage of 2.2 or the percentage of overall it's hovering around 5%. Can we finally break that number? Can we finally start making lasting changes? And without Black attorneys that are in these cases, without so many others that are able to make an impact, I don't really see a lot changing in this country. You can't really have an impact on the game if you don't know the rules. So I think passing along this information of the first Black attorney in the country will help continue on that legacy and continue on making sure that there's many more after him.
Well, I don't have anything else. I think everything was said everything was great. And I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your busy, very busy schedules and to add some, more context into our exhibit that we have on Mr. Allen here at the Freedom Center. And even though I've had a lot of, done a lot of research for the exhibit, I mean, with your expertise, I learned more, learned some more stuff and interesting and inspiring things about Mr. Allen. So again, thank you so much for, bringing some of your expertise in of the legal field to this talk. So I want to tell people that the exhibit is still on display right now until March 31st, 2022. And thank you, gentlemen, and you have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.